Grace Bellamy said the word before she could stop herself. Undatable. She said it standing in the marble-floored office of the most dangerous man in the city, surrounded by 4 men in dark suits who did not blink, who did not breathe differently, who simply watched their boss the way soldiers watch a fuse. She said it to his face, across a desk the size of a small boat, and for 3 full seconds, nobody in that room made a sound. Then Damien Cassano set down his pen, folded his hands, and said the sentence that would end her old life and begin a new one. Good, he said. I was not looking for someone who would lie to me. That was the moment the room went silent, and that was the moment Grace realized she had just made the worst and best mistake of her career. 3 weeks earlier, none of this had existed. Grace Bellamy ran a small, exacting matchmaking agency out of a converted brownstone in the East 60s, a business built entirely on her own reputation for telling the truth to people who were used to being flattered. She had built Bellamy Introductions out of nothing but a notebook, a sharp eye, and a strange, almost unnerving gift she had never been able to fully explain to clients. She could read a person in 90 seconds, the way a man held eye contact a half-second too long when he lied, the way a woman's shoulders dropped when she finally stopped performing. Grace saw the truth underneath the polish, and in a city full of curated dating profiles and rehearsed first dates, that gift had made her both feared and sought after by the kind of people who could afford to be picky. Bankers, heiresses, a senator's son who had needed, more than anything, someone to tell him no. She did not do it for the money, though the money was very good. She did it because somewhere beneath the ledger and the appointment book, Grace still believed that even the coldest people deserved to be seen clearly, just once, by someone who was not afraid of them. She had never expected that belief to be tested by Damien Cassano. The call had come through a lawyer, which should have been her first warning. No client of Bellamy Introductions had ever needed a lawyer to make an introduction. The voice on the other end of the line was clipped, professional, utterly without warmth, and it used a name Grace recognized the way most of the city recognized it, in the lowered voices of dinner parties, in the particular silence that fell over a restaurant when a certain black car pulled up outside. The Cassano family did not advertise what it was. It did not need to. Everyone in the shipping unions, in the freight yards along the river, in 3 boroughs of real estate holdings that never quite made sense on paper, understood exactly what Damien Cassano's signature meant on a contract. He was 36 years old, and he had run that empire for 9 years, since the night his father was shot outside a restaurant on Mulberry Street, and Damien, then 27, had walked into the family's inner circle and simply never left. People who worked for him did not call him ruthless. They called him precise, which was worse, because precision meant he never did anything he had not already decided to do 3 moves in advance. Grace almost said no. She had a policy, unspoken but absolute, about clients whose money she could not trace to anything she wanted to understand. But the lawyer had mentioned a number that made her assistant, Priya, actually gasp out loud in the next room, and beneath the caution, some small, reckless part of Grace, the part that had made her open her own business at 26, with nothing but nerve, wanted to know what kind of man paid that much to be told the truth about himself. So she went. She wore her sharpest gray suit, the one that made her feel like armor rather than fabric, and she walked into a building on the west side that had no sign on the door, only a single buzzer and a camera that watched her the entire time she waited. The elevator opened directly into his office. No waiting room, no receptionist, which told her something immediately. This was not a man who let strangers linger in his space. 4 men stood along the walls like furniture that happened to be armed, and behind the desk sat Damien Cassano, and Grace's first real thought, before fear, before caution, before anything sensible at all, was that photographs hadn't done him justice, and that this was exactly the kind of thought that got women in her position into trouble. He did not stand when she entered. He watched her cross the room the way a man watches weather move in, gauging whether it will pass or whether it will be a problem. He was dressed the way she imagined he did everything, without excess, without decoration, a dark suit with no tie, sleeves rolled once at the forearm, a single ring on his right hand bearing a crest she did not recognize and did not ask about. His eyes were the kind of pale gray that made people say things they had not intended to say, simply to fill the silence he left hanging in the air like a held breath. "Miss Bellamy," he said. "Sit." It was not rude, exactly. It was simply a man who had never in his adult life needed to soften a command into a request. "I don't take instructions before I take a case," Grace said, and she remained standing. Something moved behind his eyes, not quite amusement, something colder and more interested than that. "Then let's discuss the case," he said, and gestured, this time at the chair, the word "please" arriving late and clearly unfamiliar in his mouth. Grace sat. She had already decided, in that first exchange, that she was going to need every ounce of nerve she owned to get through the next hour, and she had absolutely no intention of letting him see that. Before we go any further into what happened in that office, and everything that came after it, I want to say, if you love stories about power, obsession, dangerous men who are forced to confront the one thing they cannot control, and women who refuse to be intimidated by any of it, make sure you've hit that subscribe button and turned on notifications for the Mafia boss stories, because what happens between Grace Bellamy and Damien Cassano over the next few weeks is going to test both of them in ways neither one saw coming. And I want to know, in the comments below, if a man like Damien Cassano sat across from you and told you to sit, would you sit down? Or would you walk straight back out that door? Let me know. Now, back to the office on the west side, and the conversation that was about to change everything. Damien explained what he wanted with the same flat efficiency he might have used to negotiate a shipping contract. He was getting married. Not for love. He said the word, the way another man might say a foreign currency he did not deal in, but for the family. There was an arrangement, decades old, between the Cassanos and another organization, the Reyes Syndicate out of Miami, an alliance sealed the old way, through marriage, through blood mixing with blood, so that neither side could betray the other without betraying their own children. The bride had already been selected, a woman named Camila Reyes, the niece of the Miami boss, 29 years old, beautiful in every photograph Grace was shown, and utterly unknown to Damien beyond a handshake at a funeral 3 years earlier. "I don't need you to find her," Damien said. "I need you to prepare me for her. Tell me what I am dealing with. You have a reputation, Miss Bellamy, for telling people things they don't want to hear about the person across the table from them. I would like that service applied to my own engagement before I sign a contract that cannot be undone." Grace studied him for a long moment. Behind her ribs, something that was not quite fear and not quite fascination sat very still, waiting. "You want me to read her," Grace said slowly. "Or do you want me to read you?" For the first time, something shifted in his composure. Not much, a fraction of a degree, the kind of movement most people would never have caught. But Grace had spent a decade learning to see exactly that kind of movement. "Explain," he said. "You didn't hire a private investigator," Grace said. "You could have. You have 4 men in this room who could find out everything there is to know about Camila Reyes in 48 hours without leaving their desks. You hired someone who reads people. That's not information you're after, Mr. Cassano. That's permission. You want someone to sit across from this arrangement and tell you whether you can survive it. The silence that followed was long enough that one of the men against the wall shifted his weight, just slightly, the way soldiers do when the air in a room changes pressure. You have 90 seconds with people, Damien said finally. Is that what you've decided about me, and the time it took you to walk from that elevator to this chair? No, Grace said. I've decided you've spent 9 years making sure nobody gets 90 seconds. That's different. That's not a personality. That's a wall you built after your father died in the street, and you had to become someone who couldn't be caught off guard ever again. She watched the words land, watched him go very still, in the particular way of a man who has just been struck. Somewhere he keeps carefully armored, and some instinct she should have obeyed told her to stop there. She did not stop there. So no, I don't think you're undateable because you're cold, Mr. Cassano. I think you're undateable because you've spent 9 years making sure no one could ever get close enough to find out you're not. That was when she said it. Undateable. Out loud, in a room full of men who worked for him, to the single most dangerous person she had ever sat across from in her professional life. And the moment it left her mouth, Grace felt the floor of her own confidence drop out from under her, because there was no version of this meeting in which telling a man like Damien Cassano he was undateable in front of his own soldiers ended well. Except it did not end the way she expected. He set down the pen he had been turning between his fingers. He folded his hands. And in a voice that had gone very quiet, very level, a voice that made the 4 men along the wall go rigid, in a way that told Grace this was not a tone they were used to hearing directed anywhere but at enemies, he said, "Good. I was not looking for someone who would lie to me." Then he looked at her, really looked at her, in a way that made every professional instinct in Grace's body sit up at attention. Everyone else who has walked into this office in the last 9 years has told me what they thought I wanted to hear. My own men do it. My own family does it. You are the first person who has told me the truth in longer than I can remember, Miss Bellamy. And you did it while looking directly at 4 armed men who would have removed you from this building if I had raised one finger. A pause. I would like to hire you, not to prepare me for Camila Reyes. I would like you to tell me, over the coming weeks, exactly what you see. About her. About the arrangement. About me. I find that I am suddenly very interested in the truth, now that I know it exists. Grace should have said no. Every rule she had built her business on told her to say no. Not because of the danger, though the danger was real, but because something about the way he had looked at her in that last sentence told her this was not going to be a simple consulting job. This was going to be personal, in a way she was not prepared for. But she thought about the number the lawyer had named, and she thought about the strange, electric silence that had followed her own honesty into that room. And, more than either of those things, she thought about the flicker she had seen behind his eyes when she said the word wall, the flicker of a man who had not expected to be understood, and some reckless, curious part of her said yes before her better judgment could stop it. One condition, Grace said. I don't work for men who think honesty is a service they can turn off when it's inconvenient. If I take this, I tell you what I see. All of it. Even when you don't like it. That, Damien said, is the only reason I'm hiring you. The weeks that followed unfolded slowly, the way real danger always does. Not in gunfire and car chases, but in dinners that lasted too long, in silences that meant more than words, in the particular tension of two people who were supposed to be keeping a professional distance and kept finding reasons not to. Grace met Camila Reyes twice, once at a charity gala, where the other woman smiled with her mouth and never once with her eyes, and once at a private lunch, where Camila asked careful, pointed questions about Damien's routines, his schedule, the men who guarded him, questions that had nothing to do with falling in love and everything to do with logistics. Grace's instincts, the same instincts that had built her entire career, began to hum with a low, insistent warning she could not yet name. She spent more time than the job required in Damien's company, ostensibly to observe him, to understand what she was preparing him for. In reality, she found herself drawn back to that office on the west side, the way a person is drawn back to a fire they know is dangerous, simply because it is the only place warm enough to feel real. Damien, for his part, began doing something Grace suspected he had not done with another human being in 9 years. He talked. Not about the business, not about the family, but about small things. The particular ache of Sunday dinners after his father died, and nobody knew how to sit at the head of the table. The fact that he had not taken a vacation since he was 27 because stillness made him feel like a target. The way he had learned, very young, that softness in his world got people killed, so he had simply stopped being soft, the way a person stops touching a burn. "You're doing it again," Grace told him one night, 3 weeks into the arrangement, in the quiet after his men had left the office, and it was only the two of them, and the city glittering cold and distant through the windows. "Turning the wall back on. I watch you do it every time you say something real. You say it, and then your whole face closes like a door. It kept me alive," Damien said. "It's also going to keep you alone," Grace said. "For the rest of your life if you let it. Camila Reyes isn't going to break that wall down. I don't think she's even trying to. I think—" She stopped herself. "Say it," Damien said. His voice had that low, dangerous quiet again, but Grace had learned, over 3 weeks, that this particular quiet was not a warning anymore. It was an invitation. "I think she's not interested in you at all," Grace said. "I think she's interested in your calendar, your travel patterns, who's in the room when, and when your guard is lowest. I've been doing this a long time, Mr. Cassano, and I know what falling in love looks like on a person's face, even when they're pretending. Camila Reyes has never once looked at you like that. She looks at you like a woman memorizing a floor plan." The silence that followed was the longest one yet, and this time it was Damien who broke it, and what he said changed the shape of everything that came after. "I know," he said quietly. "I've known for 2 weeks. I wanted to see if you would tell me, or if you'd protect the arrangement because it's what my family wants. You're the only person who's told me the truth about her without me asking twice." It turned out Damien had his own suspicions, quieter and better armed than Grace's, running in parallel the entire time. His cousin and underboss, Nico Cassano, the man who had stood closest to him in that first meeting, the man who had run the family's day-to-day operations at Damien's right hand for 9 years, had grown restless in ways Damien had chosen, out of old loyalty, not to look at too closely. Smaller shipments going missing, meetings Nico attended that he never fully reported back on. A pattern, Damien admitted, that had been forming for over a year, one he had refused to see because Nico was the last piece of family he had left from before his father died, and some part of him could not survive suspecting the one person who had never left his side. Grace's gift, the one that read rooms in 90 seconds, turned its full attention on Nico the next time she saw him. At a family dinner, Damien invited her to, under the thin cover of finalizing wedding preparations. And what she saw chilled her in a way nothing about Damien ever had. Nico did not have Camilla's cold, professional detachment. Nico had something worse. The easy, practiced warmth of a man who has spent a decade learning exactly how to be trusted, and who has never once, in all that time, meant a single word of it. She watched him laugh at Damien's jokes a half-second too late, the way a man laughs when he is performing rather than feeling. She watched him watch the exits. Before I tell you what Grace uncovered that night, and what it meant for both Damien and everyone in that room, I want to pause and ask you, because I think you already suspect where this is going. Do you think loyalty built over 9 years can survive the moment someone finally sees through it? Stay with me, because what happens next is the reason this story exists. That night, after the dinner, Grace told Damien everything. The missing shipments were a smaller symptom of a larger disease, and Nico was not simply skimming from the family for his own gain. He was feeding information to the Reyes Syndicate, the same organization that had sent Camilla to marry into the Cassano family in the first place. The marriage was never meant to be an alliance. It was meant to be an infiltration, a way to place someone inside Damien's household, inside his calendar, inside the rooms where his guard came down, so that when the moment came, someone would already know exactly where he would be standing, and exactly how many men would be watching him. Nico had been the architect from the beginning, trading a share of Miami's territory for Damien's life, and he had waited 9 patient years, playing the loyal cousin, for the arrangement that would finally deliver his boss into a trap disguised as a wedding. Damien did not shout when she told him. He went very still. The same stillness Grace had learned meant he was doing the most dangerous kind of thinking, the kind that did not need to raise its voice to be lethal. "The engagement dinner," he said finally. 3 nights from now. Camilla's entire family will be in the building. If Nico has been planning this for a year, that's his moment. That's when he'll want me distracted, surrounded by people I can't shoot my way out past. "Then don't walk into it blind," Grace said. "I won't," Damien said, and looked at her with an intensity that had nothing left of the careful, guarded man from that first meeting. "Because you're the only person who saw it. My own security team missed it. My own family missed it. You walked into that dinner as a stranger, and you saw the truth in 90 seconds, the same way you saw it about me the first day you walked into my office." He paused. "I built a wall for 9 years, Grace, and you're the only person who ever got past it without me handing you the key. I don't know what to do with that. I'm not sure I know how to want something the way I've started wanting this, wanting you, without it being a weakness someone can use against me." "Then don't treat it like a weakness," Grace said, and her voice was not steady, not anymore, not after weeks of watching this man's careful armor come apart in small, private moments, meant only for her. "Treat it like the one thing in your life nobody planned and nobody can plan for, because it's real." The engagement dinner 3 nights later was, on the surface, exactly what it appeared to be. Crystal and candlelight, a string quartet, the Reyes family arriving in a procession of black cars, Camilla in white silk, playing the radiant bride, with a precision that would have fooled anyone who had not spent 3 weeks learning to read the difference between performance and feeling. But beneath the surface, everything had already changed. Damien had spent the 3 days since Grace's revelation quietly repositioning his own people. Men whose loyalty predated Nico's rise. Men who owed Damien their lives rather than their comfort. He had told no one but his oldest captain and the 2 guards who had served his father before him. He wanted Nico to walk into that room believing he still held every card. Grace stood near the edge of the ballroom that night in a dress the color of dried blood, not because she had been asked to dress for the part, but because some instinct told her She needed to look like she belonged in a room full of people who might, within the hour, be trying to kill each other. She watched Nico work the room with his easy, practiced warmth, watched him check his watch twice in the space of 10 minutes, watched him drift, with studied casualness, toward the service corridor that led to the kitchen, and beyond it, to the private elevator that would carry Damien up to sign the final contract with Camilla's father at exactly 9 o'clock. The contract Nico had insisted, weeks earlier, should be signed privately, away from the crowd, for the family's protection. It was Grace who saw the two unfamiliar men in catering uniforms who had no business near a kitchen they had clearly never worked in before, men whose eyes tracked Damien across the room instead of the trays in their hands. It was Grace who crossed that ballroom faster than a woman in heels should have been able to move, who caught Damien's captain by the sleeve and said 4 words that turned the entire carefully staged evening on its head. The elevator. Now. Stop him. What happened in the next 90 seconds would be discussed for years afterward, among the kind of people who discussed such things in lowered voices. How Damien's men closed around the service corridor before Nico's hired guns ever reached the elevator. How Nico himself was intercepted at the edge of the ballroom with a phone in his hand and a text message half-typed to a Miami number. How Camilla's carefully composed performance cracked for exactly 1 visible second when she understood the plan had failed, before she smoothed her face back into a bride's practiced calm and reached, too late, for the small pistol concealed in her clutch. It would be discussed how Damien Cassano, a man who had not raised his voice in 9 years of running an empire, stood in the center of his own engagement dinner and said, quietly enough that only the people closest to him could hear, that the wedding was canceled and that his cousin would not be leaving the building. Nico did not go quietly. He never got the chance to explain himself because there was nothing left to explain. Damien had seen in his cousin's face in that final moment the same performed warmth Grace had described 3 nights earlier, and understanding it for what it was broke something in him that 9 years of running a criminal empire had never managed to break. It was not rage that Grace saw on his face as his men led Nico away. It was grief, old and enormous. Grief for a cousin who had died to him the day he chose Miami's money over 9 years of blood, and grief, underneath that, for the version of himself who had wanted, so badly, to believe that at least one person in his life had never been performing. Camilla and her father were escorted out under armed guard before the police the Cassano family did not need ever became involved. What happened to the Reyes Syndicate's Miami operation in the weeks that followed was a story that unfolded in other rooms, far from Grace, and she was glad, in the end, not to know the details. It was Grace who found Damien afterward, alone on the terrace above the ruined ballroom, still in his dinner jacket, the city spread out cold and glittering below him, the way it always was, indifferent to what had almost happened in the room beneath his feet. He did not turn when she stepped out beside him. "You saved my life tonight," he said. "I did my job," Grace said. "I told you what I saw." "That's not what I mean." He turned, finally, and there was nothing left of the wall in his face, none of the careful, guarded stillness that had first made half a city afraid of him. "You told me what you saw in that office, the very first day, when you looked at 4 armed men and called me undateable to my face. Nobody has ever done that. Nobody has ever cared enough about the truth of who I am to risk it. And I have spent 3 weeks trying to convince myself that hiring you was about the wedding, about Camilla, about protecting the family. And it was never about any of that. It was about you. It has been about you since the moment you refused to sit down until I said please." "Damien, I'm asking you," he said, and his voice, for the first time since Grace had known him, shook, just slightly, in a way she understood had cost him more than any confrontation with Nico ever could. Not as a client, not as a job, but as the only person who has ever seen through every wall I built and stayed anyway. To stay. Not for a case. Not for an assignment. For me. Grace looked at him for a long moment. This man who commanded fear in 3 boroughs and had just, for the first time in 9 years, asked for something instead of ordering it. And she thought about every rule she had built her business on, every careful boundary she had drawn around clients whose money she could not fully understand. And she found, standing on that terrace with the whole cold city glittering below them, that she did not want a single one of those rules anymore. "I called you undateable," she said softly, "because I thought no one could get close enough to prove me wrong." "And now?" Damien said. "Now I think," Grace said, closing the distance between them. "You were just waiting for someone brave enough to try." He kissed her the way he did everything, with total, deliberate focus, as if in that single moment there was nothing else in the world requiring his attention. No empire, no danger, no 9 years of careful armor, only her. And somewhere below them, in a ballroom full of wilting flowers and abandoned wedding favors, the life Damien Cassano had built to keep everyone out finally, quietly, let one person in. 6 months later, Bellamy Introductions closed its doors to new clients for the first time in its history. Not because the business had failed, but because its founder had discovered there was exactly one match left in the city she still needed to make, and she had already found him. Grace Bellamy did not become Mrs. Cassano in a ballroom full of strangers and hidden guns. She married Damien in a small chapel upstate, with no cameras, no arrangements, no families sealing alliances through blood. Only 2 people who had learned, against every likelihood either of them had ever believed in, that the truth, spoken plainly, even to the most dangerous man in the city, was the only foundation strong enough to build something real on. If you were captivated by Grace Bellamy's fearless honesty and Damien Cassano's slow, hard-won unraveling, don't forget to hit that like button. We love bringing you these intense stories filled with betrayal, power, and unexpected twists. What would you have done in Grace's shoes, standing in that office, 4 armed men watching your every move? Would you have told him the truth, or would you have played it safe? Drop a comment below and let us know. Make sure to subscribe to the Mafia Boss Stories and turn on notifications, so you never miss the next story of dangerous men, unbreakable women, and the truths that change everything.